Welcome. This is a place where small stories are told, not to complain about sadness, but to remind us that no matter how deep we fall, there is always a way to rise again. There are times in life when we just want to disappear. We stop talking to people, we stay inside our room with the lights off, and let loneliness quietly wrap around us. But in those silent moments, a small voice deep inside often whispers, "Don't give up. You can still start over." This story is for anyone who has ever been hurt, who has ever felt not good enough, and who has thought that everything was over. The truth is, no one can save you except yourself. And sometimes, all it takes is one small step, one deep breath, one morning when you choose to walk outside, and life begins to change. He used to be a gentle man, a little overweight, simple and quiet. Every day looked the same. He went to work, came home, ate a quick dinner, then scrolled through his phone until sleep finally came. Life was steady, ordinary, and strangely hollow. Sometimes he asked himself what he was really living for, but the thought always faded away because he was simply too tired to find an answer. Everything began to change when the person he loved most left. There was no warning, no big argument, just one short message on his phone. "I'm sorry, I've met someone else." When he read those words, he sat there for a long time. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He just felt something heavy sink deep into his chest, as if all the color in his world had drained away. From that day on, he withdrew into himself. He stopped seeing friends, avoided small talk with coworkers, and spent his evenings lying in bed staring at the ceiling. In his tiny apartment, the only sounds were the ticking of a clock and his own weary breathing. His body started to change, slower, heavier. Each time he looked in the mirror, he saw someone unfamiliar staring back. Tired eyes, dull skin, a man who seemed to have lost his spark. He tried to exercise a few times but quit after a day or two. Everything felt meaningless. One evening, while cleaning out a drawer, he found an old pair of running shoes. The ones he had bought a year ago, promising himself that he would start working out, that he would take better care of his life. But that promise, like many others, had been quietly forgotten. The shoes were still new, just covered in a thin layer of dust. He picked them up, brushed them off, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his mind. A small, almost invisible spark. Perhaps the deepest pain wasn't that someone had left him, but that he had left himself long before they did. He sat down, holding the shoes in his hands, and for the first time in months, he took a long, heavy breath. Not the sigh of exhaustion, but the breath of a man realizing it was time to change. It was a quiet, gray morning. He woke up earlier than usual, not because he wanted to, but because there was no reason to keep sleeping anymore. The small room was still, filled only with the pale light slipping through the curtains. He reached for his phone, and the first photo that appeared on his screen made his heart freeze. She, the woman who had once held his hand for 3 long years, was standing there in a white wedding dress, smiling radiantly beside another man. The sunlight in the photo was so bright it hurt his eyes. He stared at it for a long time, hands trembling slightly. He didn't scream, didn't curse. He just sat there, as if every bit of strength had been drained out of his body. A wave of pain and emptiness spread across his chest. His throat tightened. His heartbeat grew heavy. He dropped the phone and sat still, listening to the sound of rain beginning to fall outside. Drop after drop, slow and cold. Inside him, something quietly broke. It wasn't anger, it was realization. She's really gone, And maybe I left myself long before she did. He looked around the room. Everything was the same. The messy desk, the pair of dusty running shoes in the corner. He stood up, walked over, and picked them up. There was no music, no applause, no encouragement. Only one man, trying to find his breath again. He slipped his feet into the shoes, pulled the laces tight, and opened the door. The cold wind brushed his face, and he shivered, but somehow it felt lighter. The street outside was wet with rain, empty and quiet. He began to run. Each step was heavy, his breath short, his heart pounding hard in his chest. The exhaustion came quickly, but he didn't stop. The harder he ran, the more tears came, mixing with the rain until he could no longer tell them apart. He didn't even know what he was crying for the loss, for regret, or for the first time in so long. He was truly facing himself. In the middle of the rain, gasping for air, a faint smile appeared on his lips. Tired, wet, but real. It's okay. I'm still here. In that moment, he understood. The most important thing isn't who left, but that he still had the courage to keep moving, even if it's just one small step in the rain. After that morning, he was no longer the same. It wasn't a sudden change. It was something deeper, something inside him that had quietly awakened. In the days that followed, he kept running, not to forget someone, but to reconnect with himself, with every breath, every heartbeat. At first, he could barely run a few hundred meters before stopping, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. But each day, his steps grew longer, his breath steadier, and within every drop of sweat, he could feel his sadness slowly melting away. His body began to change, slowly but surely. The soft belly flattened, his legs grew stronger, his eyes looked brighter, and his posture stood taller. Friends started to notice the difference, but what he noticed most was that no one could make him proud, except himself. Every morning, as the sun rose, he tied his shoelaces, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. He no longer thought about the past. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. He just ran, simply because he loved that feeling of freedom, the feeling of being truly alive. Sometimes, when he paused by a park bench, he saw other people exercising. The elderly, the young, each carrying their own fatigue, but also a quiet hope in their eyes. And he smiled, because he knew everyone was fighting their own loneliness. At night, he cooked dinner, listened to soft music, and for the first time in months, he felt peace. He no longer needed someone beside him to feel that life was meaningful. One evening, a friend came to him, heartbroken. He listened quietly, then said gently, "A broken heart isn't the end. It's the beginning, the moment you start living true to yourself." He said it softly, but behind those words was everything he had lived through. He felt gratitude for the pain, for the person who left, because without them, he might never have found his way back to himself. The next morning, he ran down the same familiar path again. The wind brushed through his hair. The sunlight rested warm on his shoulders. And in that moment, he smiled. Not for anyone, but simply because he was truly happy. It was another morning. Clear sky, gentle wind. He was running on the same familiar path, but everything felt different now. The sunlight wasn't harsh anymore. The city noise no longer bothered him, and his heart finally felt light again. The old running shoes that had followed him through rain and sunshine were worn at the heels, their color fading slightly. Yet every time he bent down to tie the laces, a quiet gratitude rose within him. because those shoes had witnessed his journey back to himself. He stopped under the trees, looking up at the brightening sky. There was no pain left, only a deep, peaceful warmth spreading through his chest. He was no longer the man he once was, the one who felt broken, insecure, and lost. Now, he was someone who could smile at the past and be thankful for every fall along the way. If she hadn't left, he whispered, maybe I would never have found myself. He smiled, a real, gentle, luminous smile. In the distance, at the park, a young woman was jogging. For a brief moment, their eyes met. She smiled back. He nodded slightly, then kept running. Not rushing, not expecting anything. Just living, fully, in each step. Sometimes, life doesn't need someone to complete us. It only asks that we be brave enough to love ourselves again. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, falling softly across his shoulders like a quiet blessing. Everything around him was still the same, but he was no longer the same man. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you're also going through days of loneliness, please remember, you are not alone. Everyone carries their own wounds, but within each of us lies the strength to heal. Sometimes, all it takes is one small step, one morning when you choose to step outside, one deep breath, and everything quietly begins to change. Trust your journey and love the person you are becoming. I'll see you again in the next story, where we'll walk together once more on the path toward peace within.